Is the World Health Organization in the Chinese government's pocket? How to restart the economy, a roadmap to reopening that I will work you through. Plus, the IHME numbers are wrong again. Are we allowed to ask these questions yet? And Bernie Sanders suspends his presidential campaign. Trump doesn't want mail-in ballots. We got that and more coming up on the Buck Sexton Show.
Are you cooperating with
I don't
China?
know. Who are you working for? China? You work for China, or are you with a newspaper? Who are you with?
Hong Kong Phoenix TV.
Who owns that? China? Is it owned by China?
Hong Kong.
No, is it owned by the state?
No, it's not. It's a private-owned company.
Okay, good. Okay. Look.
Welcome to the Buck Sexton Show, everybody. Turns out that President Trump was spot on there. He was correct. There is Chinese government ownership of that journalist's Phoenix TV in Hong Kong. So we now have Chinese government propaganda in the White House West Wing trying to carry water for the Chinese Communist Party, trying to do what is possible to put the blame away from China and onto the U.S. And as we know, our own media tends to go along with this. Our media, our corporate media, is rooting for the Chinese Communist Party over the Trump administration. That's where we are right now. No surprise to anybody, but that's just the truth. ABC News today, Wuhan. This is ABC News from their official account, millions and millions of followers. Wuhan, the city where the coronavirus outbreak began, celebrates lifting travel restrictions with a light show. By the way, did I welcome everybody to the Buck Sexton Show? I think I skipped. I was so excited to talk to all of you. I think I skipped right past that, so apologies. Anyway, back to ABC News, propagandists, leftists, not helping America. Yeah, that's right. They're showing the light show in Wuhan to celebrate defeating the virus in that city. Does anyone really think that China has figured this out? That China has managed to eradicate this virus? We're having public health officials. You had Dr. Emanuel, who's Rahm Emanuel's. No, he's Ari Emanuel's brother, not Rahm Emanuel's brother. Or is it Rahm Emanuel's brother? I can't remember. But Dr. Zeke Emanuel, saying that we might be under lockdown for 18 months. I'll get to that. There is a roadmap. AEI, the American Enterprise Institute, published it. And it's lining up with everything I'm seeing from the administration. I read this policy proposal from this think tank, and we'll get to that later on in the show. It does have a step-by-step. It does have some metrics. It's useful. And speaking of metrics, we'll also talk about the Institute for Health Metrics and Evaluation, the one place that's putting out these numbers, that Washington University. This is funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. The numbers are way off once again. Now, the numbers are way off, but there's still way too many people, far too many people dying right now. It is a massive tragedy here in New York, and in other parts of the country, they're losing far too many lives as well. That is established. That is a fact. We know that, but we also need to be making policy decisions. If we're using numbers and metrics, the numbers and metrics have to be accurate. So when I'm talking about projections, not talking about the death toll, although there is a discussion also about how we're counting COVID deaths. That's become now a much more fierce debate than I think many people would have anticipated. That will also come up later on today in the show. But I want to focus more on China for a moment here, and the World Health Organization, and our own corporate media, as we know, is conflicted. They don't think of it this way. They won't admit to this, but you look at who is really fast to take the side of the Chinese government, to take the word of the Chinese government in this whole process. And remember, my friends, we have now, this virus, this horrific pandemic, is also a historic inflection point. An inflection point in the conflict between the United States, our Western way of life, and our role in the world, and China. I think that's becoming abundantly clear to most people who look at these things. We are now in a new era of U.S.-China competition. They're going to make all of our goods, get rich, send us cheap TVs, and they'll just buy a bunch of our debt and everything will be fine. That's going away. That's not going to be here anymore. And guess what's going to replace it? much more open and much more aggressive competition in every arena, political, economic, cultural, you name it. There's going to be a battle for influence between the United States and China. Now it's going to be a little bit of time before all of that really ramps up, because right now we're all so focused on the virus. But notice how the Chinese are clearly the Chinese Communist Party. And by the way, I'm going to use those terms generally interchangeably. Just know I'm not talking about 1 billion people who are just trying to go about their lives like everybody else. I'm not. So when I say the Chinese are, I'm talking about the Chinese regime, the Chinese government. OK, so we can establish that. So, media matters. Go harass some other conservative. All right. I'm establishing that for the record. When I refer to China, I'm talking about the government. OK, good. Now that we've done that, the Chinese are causing a lot of problems right now for us. They're lying about this. Their propagandists are somewhat reminiscent of, if you recall, that they used to call him, that guy Baghdad Bob, who was I think it was the Minister of Foreign Affairs, who was saying that there was no America. This is back in was it the first, the second? No, it was the first Persian Gulf War. There was nothing happening here, and there were bombs going off in the background behind him on TV. But, the Americans aren't going to do anything, and we'll beat them. And the Chinese propaganda right now, the efforts that we see online, seem laughable to you and to me. But meanwhile, the corporate media that you would think China is a massive human rights abuser, is more successful in suppressing freedom of the press than any other regime in the world, is more aggressive about it. I think there might be more technically, I don't know, Turkey jails a lot of journalists per capita, but I mean, China, there is no freedom of the press in China. In fact, the concept from when I was in China a year ago talking to academics and business leaders there who are willing to speak to Americans pretty openly, the concept of individual freedom is very different there. It's not even clear that it exists in some ways. Certainly freedom of expression, no, that's not a thing that there's a huge movement toward. You don't hear about that. And keep in mind, this is a country that we have our understanding of Chinese intentions, our understanding of what their long game is in this country is minimal. Remember when after 9/11, people were running around saying, hold on a second, you mean the U.S. government has like a handful of highly cleared Arabic speakers? This is the best we can do when we're going to war with al-Qaeda? Yeah, that was the best that we had to ramp up and do. Our knowledge of China is it's poor, my friends. I'll tell you, it's not good, because it's a very hard target for collection. They operate an authoritarian regime. They're technologically very sophisticated. They don't have any, we've got lawyers and civil rights groups and all these things that at least somewhat keep the intelligence community and law enforcement authorities in check. And also we have this whole, Molon Labe, don't tread on me, Second Amendment. The Chinese have been able to lock down. They've got the Great Firewall of China. They lock down information. And yet journalists in this country seem to have so much less hostility toward the Chinese government than they do to America. Now, why is that? To the American government, right? It's because if you look at this, I really believe that they understand that a lot of their constituents, I shouldn't say constituents, wrong word, audience, a lot of the media's, although, depends, a lot of their audience is psychotically anti-Trump. We know that. So bashing the U.S. government as long as Trump is the president, that's good for business. But what's bad for business is having any sort of Chinese campaign against them. What's bad for business is when the Chinese government decides your reporters aren't allowed to be here. Remember, they expelled Wall Street Journal, New York Times, and I think Washington Post reporters a few weeks ago. Not a lot of talk about it, and it's because the media, the conglomerates, the companies, the corporations that own these media outlets are very conflicted. They want access to the Chinese market, right? If you're a company that you look at NBC Universal. I mean, if you're a news organization within one of these major corporations that has a lot of business interests in China, wants access to the Chinese market, you're in the pocket of the Chinese authorities in some way. This is why it was such a wake-up call with the NBA when you have incredibly famous multimillionaire basketball players who were like, "Oh no, I'm not going to criticize China. We make a lot of money selling merchandise there, and Chinese playing the NBA, TV rights and everything else. That can't do that." And a lot of people were. That was a wake up call for America. I know it seemed like a relatively minor issue at the time to some people, but I do think that it was a harbinger of things to come. This was true during the Cold War, too. There were people who were useful idiots for the Soviets. There were news organizations that were far too favorable in this country toward the Soviet Union. We know about Walter Duranty and lying about the Holodomor, which was the Holocaust, the intentional starvation of a few million Ukrainians from back in the 1930s. So this problem of not being able to trust our own media when there's a major opponent out there that has either ideological or financial influence on media here, we've been there before. That's where we are with China now. But that's where I want to direct our attention now. So this virus has kicked off what is going to be a new global competition with China, where we realize that they think that this is zero sum and winner take all. Now, we can either rise to that, or we can pretend that there can be a completely mutually beneficial relationship with a totalitarian, human rights abusing, internment camp using Chinese Communist Party, right? Or we can understand that this is just going to be a new version of a Cold War in the 20th century for global domination. That's where we're heading. And that then makes me want to talk about the World Health Organization and what we've seen them doing in this whole process.
So you have a World Health, very China-centric, as I say, very basically everything was very positive for China. Don't close your borders. They told me that, they strongly recommended, they're not telling me, but they strongly recommended that we not close our borders. That would have been a disaster. It would have been a total disaster. And literally they called every shot wrong. They didn't want to say where it came from. Look, we spend, for many years, we've been funding the world, as we say, WHO, the World Health Organization. And for years we funded them, and it's probably spending at least $58 million a year, but it's much more than that, because then we fund some of the work they do, which is some good work. But we're going to look at it now, because I think every step that they made, everything that they said was wrong.
So far, that certainly seems to be the case, doesn't it? The WHO, the WHO, the World Health Organization. It's been around since 1948. It's really the body within the UN mandate that tries to deal with global pandemics, disease, and they've done some very good work. If you look at their history on smallpox, on malaria, diseases that are still around. Malaria just ravages the world year in and year out, and because it's really a disease of the tropics and of poorer areas within the tropics, it doesn't get nearly the attention that other maladies do. But malaria has been around for a very long time and has killed probably more human beings than almost any other disease that is out there. They've been able to go back, I think, and look at fossils even. And malaria's been around for as long as human beings have been around. But this World Health Director, Dr. Tedros, that's how you hear him referred to. Dr. Tedros, his name is Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus. I think I got that right. Not an easy name to say. But Dr. Tedros, we can say that. We can certainly get that one correct. He was an obscure public health official in Ethiopia. And he is now running the World Health Organization, which at critical junctures, and we will walk through some of those together today, at critical junctures said exactly the wrong thing, gave us exactly, and I mean the whole world, gave the whole world the wrong advice, and seemed to be doing China's bidding, was at least far too favorable to the Communist Chinese Party. Far too favorable, no question. And now we're looking at this. The president's saying, he's actually saying, we're looking at this. about the funding issue. We give twice as much money, twice as much of the funding for the World Health Organization comes from the U.S. as comes from China. And yet it seems like Dr. Tedros is having the WHO act as a Chinese Communist Party propaganda organ, which is very concerning when you think about China's role in all of this. And, you know, people are angry at China, and they should be. People are upset at the Chinese government, and they should be, because their paranoia about power comes from the fact that their government position is only rooted in force and fear, ultimately. There is no underlying will of the people. There's no rule of law. It's just a thugocracy. And the notion that the Chinese government wasn't able to protect its people, even with the lockdown that it has, even with all of the different trade-offs that people have to accept to live in that country, that they couldn't protect them from this disease, that they didn't have the foresight to shut down animal markets where they're selling, you know, kangaroos and pangolins and tigers and bears. Oh, my. The fact that the Chinese Communist Party wouldn't do that and then tried to cover it up because their incompetence was a threat to their power and put all of us, you and me listening to this, we right now, every day are in jeopardy of severe physical harm. Our economy is dropping like a stone out of the sky because of the decisions made by the corrupt, authoritarian, and disgraceful Chinese Communist Party. That is where we are now as a country. That is where we are as a world. This could have been a very different thing. There are thousands and thousands of lives. The people who are saying, and let me just make sure, I want to establish a very clear test here. I want to establish a baseline. Any person you hear who says that Donald Trump has blood on his hands for the coronavirus response, for the Wuhan virus response, any person who says that, who has not already said and is not willing to say now that the Chinese Communist Party has so much blood on their hands, is a hack who is speaking in a way that betrays their country. Is a hack who is doing the bidding of the Chinese. That's right. Remember how they used to say that Trump was always doing Russia's bidding? If you say that Trump is at fault for death from this response, which I would argue that that's a fair thing to say, and there was going to be death, it's a question of how much death, we're hit with a virus, but let's put that aside for a moment. If you're going to say that Trump has blood on his hands, you better be saying that there's exponentially more blood on the hands of the Chinese Communist Party, and they must be held accountable for that, or else you aren't principled and all you care about is attacking Trump, even at the cost of undermining your own country in what is the most difficult situation it has seen since the Second World War. And that is where we are. So we should understand that right now. Anyone you see that says Trump has blood on his hands, I want to know, Susan Rice said that there's blood on Trump's hands. Has she said that there's blood on the Chinese Communist Party's hands? I'm going to bet the answer is no.
I would imagine you don't want to step into this controversy that the president apparently has created where he's blasted the WHO. Does he have a point for blaming them for what he says for spreading the virus? Does he have a point?
You know, the WHO can only react to the data it's given. And when you go back and look at the timeline, it wasn't until, I think, almost the middle of January that China reported that there was human-to-human transmission. We have to really investigate reporting and how the reports were received there. I think it did delay the ability to declare this a global pandemic and emergency. We can do all of that when we get through this as a global community to really understand how to do this better the next time.
That's Dr. Deborah Birx saying as gently as she can without starting for her purposes, we want cooperation with medical personnel, with doctors, sharing information, sharing experiences fighting this COVID virus. So I get why she takes that position. You know, I'm here. I can breathe fire on this issue. She's got a different mandate and a whole bunch more responsibility. So I respect that. But what she's telling you is exactly what I'm saying. Just sounds a little bit different. which is that, yeah, I mean, the World Health Organization, they only work with the data they brought in, but this would have been very, very different if we had known that this was something that could be so difficult to treat that when people get very sick, they can crash extremely quickly. The doctors here in New York that I'm talking to say 1 minute someone seems like they're going to be one of the lucky ones who comes to the hospital but isn't really in very bad shape, and then all of a sudden their just lung function is just collapsing, and it's really bad news, and it's a fight just to keep them alive for hours. If we had known that, that would have really changed a lot, wouldn't it? That would have really changed a lot of our preparations, because I'm going to talk to you probably in the next hour about the plan to reopen, and there's becoming, I think there's starting to be a little bit more of an understanding of what reopening looks like. It's phased, it's slow, it's step by step. It is not even walk, not run. It is crawl before you walk, before you run. That's the way the reopening is going to function, and it's going to be state by state, city by city. I read the whole. This is all I do is read about coronavirus, then I get to talk to you, wonderful folks. You've always been the highlight of my day, team, but you're really the only part of my day that doesn't involve basic life support functions now or research. Deborah Birx is saying that the World Health Organization clearly did not do what it needed to do here by sounding the alarm for the world, and that they just accepted the Chinese claim that there was no human-to-human transmission. This was in middle of January. That was not a good faith error that they made. And part of the problem here, and you see this with the UN. Remember, the World Health Organization is really it's a UN body. These are bureaucratic institutions that treat all countries, all nation states are kind of equal, kind of as likely to lie as the other. One thing I learned at the CIA is really interesting, really worthwhile, and it's informed my worldview. Governments lie all the time. All right, governments are full of lies, full of liars, and the more corrupt the government, the more lies it tells. They tell so many lies they can't even keep track of them. They're lying to other people within the government. They're lying to their the citizens of the country. They'll lie to the military. The military will lie to the government. I mean, it's just lies, lies, lies everywhere. That's the way a lot of government functions. Now, our government, sometimes, our government lies sometimes. Not nearly as much as the Chinese government, though. This is where we don't want to fall into a truth relativism where people, everybody lies, everybody does bad things. No, the Chinese government is a dishonest enterprise, a fundamentally dishonest enterprise. And so that should have rung some alarm bells, you would think, over at World Health Organization headquarters when they're saying there's no spread of this. When that first doctor came out and said this is somewhat like SARS, severe acute respiratory syndrome, which came out there were infections, I think it was in 2003 or 2004. We did, look, my friends, unfortunately, the world got warnings about a respiratory disease like this, and we just didn't do enough. We did get warnings, didn't do enough. If you want, I wish I had the time to do this. Go back when it was, I think, early fall, and someone said, "What scares me?" and I said, "Pandemic disease." This has been known. Anyone who's a reader, I guess, doesn't have to be an expert on anything. Just anyone who reads a lot knows that if you're worried about scary things, it's not an asteroid hitting the Earth. It sure as heck isn't climate change. It was this. This was the big thing that was always looming in the background. The catastrophe that was inevitable on a long enough timeline. People didn't want to deal with it, didn't want to hear it. I remember seeing people for years, particularly people who are either Asian or people who are visiting from Asia, Asian tourists in this country, with masks on, and we were all like, "What's with the masks?" Now we know. We had to learn the hard way, though. We had to learn the hard way that walls work. We had to learn the hard way that masks work. These are some pretty straightforward things that I wish we could just figure out. But why would the World Health Organization be doing China's bidding on this? And I've already told you, our media, the two reasons why our media are more pro-CCP than USA is they view Trump as the government. So any belief they have or any stories they could run that, the government lies, the government's incompetent, at the federal level, that's on Trump. So they love that. And also they have financial interests in having access, not just to Chinese markets, but their corporate sponsors. And the Chinese are very aggressive about taking they'll wage economic warfare against companies. They'll say, okay, you're out. You don't get access. This is why Hollywood edits movies, changes storylines, because they don't want to they don't want to upset the Chinese. Oh, you mean the great creatives that speak truth to power of Hollywood? Whatever happened to all their artistic integrity? They're the biggest frauds in the world. But here we have Dr. Tedros. I was telling you about him before. He was an Ethiopian health minister, I believe, was his job beforehand. And then there was a lot of push that shows, one, Chinese donations to Ethiopia. Yeah, where Tedros was health and foreign minister. A lot of Chinese money going into Ethiopia. Interesting. Probably buying some goodwill. And the leadership position that Tedros is in now won the ballot by 133 votes to 50 votes for the World Health Organization, the first African leader of the World Health Organization. He went on to have some controversy because he recommended African dictator, now deceased, Robert Mugabe, as a World Health Organization goodwill ambassador. A goodwill ambassador. Yeah, that's right. Dr. Tedros thought a guy nicknamed the Crocodile for being sly and eating his opponents, that guy was going to be a goodwill ambassador to the world for global disease. A man who turned Zimbabwe from the breadbasket of southern Africa, incredible farmland, incredible natural resources, who impoverished that country and effectively erased, not just hyperinflation, erased the currency. The currency doesn't really exist anymore. Yeah, that guy was going to be a goodwill ambassador with Dr. Tedros pushing for it. Does anyone think this guy has good judgment? And this is the man who's supposed to be coordinating the global response. He's the Dr. Fauci of the UN, if you will. He's the one who's supposed to be sounding the alarm to prevent this. Think of the responsibility. Think of all the people right now who are in hospital wards all across this country. I mean, yes, New York getting hit really badly, but New Orleans hit really badly. And just, heartbreaking. I love New Orleans. I love the people. And look, I love the people of every state in this country. But, New Jersey hit really badly. And New Jersey, I'm a New Yorker. New Jersey's like my little brother that only I'm allowed to make fun of. But I love New Jersey. I love New Jerseyans. And we have all this pain, all this suffering going on in our hospitals right now. And you have to take a moment to stop and say, hold on a second. You mean that a lot of this could have been avoided? You mean that I wouldn't have to have every person that I know in New York living under lockdown and in fear of contracting a disease that could very well hospitalize and or kill them if the Chinese Communist Party and some global bureaucrats just were able to do what was necessary earlier on, sound the alarm, take measures to get the word out. Think of also right now, we're looking at all across the board. The timing here matters so much. We're so concerned about therapeutics. Okay, well, I'm hearing that we're going to have more information in the next few weeks, and we're learning more about what drug cocktail may work to at least suppress the virus, what's going to work to deal with the inflammation in the lungs, this ARDS that's brutal, the cytokine storm that comes in that causes the overreaction in your immune system that is just devastating to the body, creates tremendous inflammation, even creates cardiac problems now. That's the latest information that you're seeing from people who have COVID-19. And we might have had much more time. We might have had a 2-month head start, not just in preparations for masks and everything else, but think about it this way. If in the next 6 to 8 weeks, we develop and this would be the answer to a prayer, if we develop a therapeutic that is really a serious weapon, not a cure, but a serious weapon against this disease, well, we could have developed that. We could have been starting that research at least 2 months earlier. How many people have died in the interim? Chinese Communist Party doesn't care. All it matters is that they stay in charge, that their power is locked in. And Dr. Tedros was willing to believe them a little too easily. Why do we have the World Health Organization if not to warn us about this? Why does the World Health Organization even really exist? Yeah, okay, they distribute malaria medicine and stuff like that. Any number of international NGOs can do that. The U.S. government can do that. I mean, the U.S. government, no one ever gives us a thank you for this, but I'm just going to say, and it was George W. Bush, who I'm giving a little special shout out to for this, because while people were calling him a war criminal, everything else, George W. Bush saved, and anyone who knows public global health issues will tell you this is true. George W. Bush saved millions and millions of African lives with anti-HIV measures that the U.S. government was funding and taking in sub-Saharan Africa. And it's something that you don't hear very much about. That is absolutely true. Millions of lives saved by the United States government, by George W. Bush in Africa. And, HIV, when it progresses to full-blown AIDS, as we know, it's a horrible disease. You get incredibly painful. It's just the worst. The worst. Millions of human beings saved from that. God bless that effort, and God bless all those folks who were able to live long and healthy lives as a result of those efforts. World Health Organization, where are they on this? And why should we think that it's not right to ask questions about this Dr. Tedros, who, I mean, do you think the Ethiopian government's corrupt? I got news for you. The Ethiopian government's very corrupt. Okay, you leave the countries of the first world. I mean, you leave America, Canada, Europe, Australia, Japan, South Korea. You leave and you go into a lot of other regions of the world, and corruption is everywhere, all across the Middle East, all across the former Soviet Union. And the headline today in the Daily Mail: China's Doctor Who. I think that says a lot. This was a huge miss. Those of us who are critics of international institutions like the United Nations point to this and say, maybe we shouldn't be told how much we have to listen to these so-called experts. And maybe it's time to recognize that an America First policy should also apply to our view of how much we can trust international institutions that think that America and China are in any way on a similar moral plane. Let me just say it. Whether it's Donald Trump as president or Barack Obama as president, or if it turns out to be Joe Biden as president, our government, with any of those leaders, is orders of magnitude more decent, more trustworthy, and better than the thugs who run the Chinese Communist Party, including Xi Jinping. That's just reality. I wish our media would pick up on that, and I wish our international institutions would reflect that, but that's never going to happen. Never going to happen, folks.
I think certain parts of the economy you're going to see come back immediately. Certain things are going to take a little bit longer. But I have every expectation that we will kill this virus soon. And when we do that, you're going to see a very big bounce back. As I've said, the economy has slowed down because we've closed down this economy. And when we reopen it, I expect that you're going to see a very strong rebound later this year.
I like the optimism from Treasury Secretary Mnuchin. The rebound that comes later this year that'll be an amazing thing. I mean, just a return to normalcy. I want to talk to you about this road. They're calling it a roadmap to reopening, and it's an AEI publication that I read, took some notes on, and we'll share with you here so we understand when we talk about reopening, because there's a lot of bad faith. You just want grandma to die. There's a lot of look, everyone's under stress right now. Everyone's tense, at least in major cities. I can't speak to if you live out on the land and off the grid and have access to well water and plenty of wild game and have some of your own. Anyway, that's that. You're in a different situation then. But for those of us who are in cities, there's a lot of tension. There's a lot of fear. And one of the problems is that whenever there's a discussion, whenever they try to get a discussion going about reopening, people say, if we reopen tomorrow, there'll be a huge surge in death and all these terrible things will happen. And so hold on a second. Reopen doesn't mean all of a sudden we're all jammed into subway cars everywhere. We all go back to work. We all, forget about the social distancing, forget about the personal protective equipment that we have now with masks, including homemade masks. and these different mitigation measures, right? That's the key word. The mitigation measures would continue, and you would gauge day to day, week to week. How are we doing? How much more can we do? That's where this needs to head. And that is the plan. There are some people who want to talk about 18 months lockdown. No, that cannot be the plan. That cannot be. That's not realistic. That's not possible. That's not desirable. So, okay, since we know that that's not the plan, the 18-month straight lockdown, and think about this. We could lock down for 18 months, and we're told, oh, yeah, sorry, turns out the vaccine doesn't work. I mean, then you'd have true anarchy, and people would completely lose their... But then we're not even going to get there. Let's talk about where we are going to go. What is the roadmap to reopening? It's coming up.